Hello and welcome to this very special episode of the Edufuturists podcast. It's a podcast like no other today. We are putting this out firstly at the end of the Edufuturists Awards. So if you're watching this or if you're listening to this straight after the awards, we hope you had a great time at the awards and thanks for joining us this afternoon. If you are listening or watching this at another time, then you can go back onto our YouTube channel and watch the award ceremony where we're celebrating those making the future of education happen, both in the UK and internationally as well. So yeah, we're really excited for our guest today, and it's going to be a deeper delve into a conversation that we started earlier in the awards ceremony. And we're really excited to have Sugata Mitra, who's going to join us on screen in a few minutes to continue the conversation. But before we do that, lads, we've just had the Edufuturists Awards. It's been a crazy few weeks for us all, I know. How's it going for you? Have you had a good one this year?
Yeah, it's been a good year, hasn't it? I know that we talked about our favourite episodes and some of the things that we've done, the opportunities we've had to interview people. Sometimes you have to pinch yourself, don't you, to think about what we actually get to do and who we get to speak to. Just three northern blokes who just trying to set up a podcast 4.5 years ago just to chat nonsense a little bit, really, it felt like. And then we get to interview some of these wonderful people. And then I think just from 10 award winners and it could have been that all the nominees could have would have been worthy winners, and then even the people that didn't even get shortlisted, just brilliant. So for me, it's been a great year, great podcast, and I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, and tonight I'm sleeping rough. This evening I am taking part in the big CEO sleep out. So I'll have some dinner. I'll get some warmer clothes on. And I'll be sleeping out in the garden.
Is that you plugging so that we can everybody can sponsor you who's listening, Steve?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So if you want to, I'll drop the link into the chat and everything else. And doing the big sleep out to raise awareness and money for homeless charities and everything else. So that's I'm glad that the event's tired me out. I'll hopefully sleep better. So the stress of that will get me through. So looking forward to it. But it's been an awesome year, and you know what? It's our bit of learning.
Yeah.
And we do it because we're passionate about everything else, but we do it because we enjoy it. Yeah. And it's amazing that we kind of find like-minded wackos on a weekly basis, and the tribe and the community that we've created, people that we're not alone. We're not a lone voice anymore, and that community is growing. And I know through our mailing list, we've got 3,000 people that now subscribe to our newsletter, and that's growing, and it's significant. It's massive, isn't it? That we've now got 3,000 people that feel and think the same way that we do. Wow, we only thought we were going to be speaking to one person listening to a podcast, or didn't think we were going to get anybody. So,
well, no, we did. We knew that my mum would like it and listen and press like and subscribe. Well done, Ben. It's really good. That kind of stuff. But I think it's just mad in it as well. Thinking about like as we every year we think, what can we do next? How are we going to go? How are we going to beat this? It's been a great day, but also great year. Where do we go next? And we're super keen and watch this space where that's going to go, but we're super keen about building a community. We've said this all along. It's always been about the community and why that matters. It's not just about three lads and their opinions and the people that they manage to speak to. It's about growing a tribe and a community. So let's watch this space on that. And if anybody wants to let us know about that, hit us up on Twitter at Edufuturists. Email us, check out the website, you know the usual drills, info@edufuturists.com. You can get in touch or like and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well, so you can get that into your feed.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that thing that just picking up on what you said about sometimes feeling like lone voices and being people who position ourselves in a place where we're always looking towards the horizon of where education could go, should go, probably should have went a long time ago. We learn from those who have been doing it a lot longer than we have and who've got a lot more wisdom than we have, and we're going to do that now. We're going to bring in Professor Sugata Mitra, who who will need no introduction if you've been watching the Edufuturists Awards, and we're going to delve into some more of his work that he's been doing over the last few decades, and kind of looking at his predictions for the future of education. So let's bring Sugata in now. Sugata, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Dan.
It really is great to have you in, and congratulations again on the Outstanding Achievement Awards for 2022.
Well, thank you for considering me for that. I think it is a very welcome, very pleasant surprise.
No, it's like I've said offline as well. It really, we're proud to be able to give it to you, and I think it's a symbol that we're learning from you, and that we have learned from you, and we want to keep learning from you as well, and your wisdom, and I don't just mean that in an academic sense, because you very much are somebody who hasn't just thought about it, but you've actually gone out there and done it, and you've proved that there is another way. So let's delve into that, because you're probably most famous for the hole in the wall experiments in the 90s, and I don't want to dwell too much on that, because I think what you've got to say today is so important, and we want to talk about your predictions for the future of education. But for the people who might not be as familiar with those hole in the wall experiments, could you tell us how you came to do it, and what exactly you did do?
Well, the hole in the wall experiments are now, I don't know, 23 years ago actually, and they took place at a time which is actually very different from what we have today. I need to expand on that just a little bit. I live up here in the north of England. Just a few miles away is where the first steam engine was built. And as many people would know, its original intention was to lift coal from the mines up a slope onto the top, which was a really difficult job to do manually, pulling those things up and so on and so forth. So that's how it got built. And so Stevenson built an engine, and the engine sort of yanked the coal up. And just imagine for a moment that while he was looking at this problem, the weight of coal was changing. Let's say that he said, this is a terrible problem. We've got to take a ton of coal up half a mile. And then he said, oh, that was yesterday. Today, actually, that same ton of coal now doesn't weigh a ton. It weighs only half a ton. And the half mile that it had to go up, well, the earth shifted a bit, and it's now only a quarter of a mile. Now, that would have been a very different world for Stevenson to have tried to invent anything. Why am I telling you this? Is because we live in that second kind of world. The internet is like that. So if I say there was a problem 23 years ago on the internet, well, it would have disappeared or changed or become worse. Or this is a big difference between doing new things on the internet as opposed to doing new things with the 19th century style mechanical devices. The problems remained constant. The solutions had to be evolved to solve the problem. What we have now are problems which constantly change. So a solution has to have the capability to also constantly change along with the problem. If you can imagine that, it's kind of weird. I keep trying to think of analogies and explain this to children, and to say that you've all heard of rats trying to navigate through a maze. How about a rat trying to navigate through a maze, but the maze itself is changing all the time? Now, would you say, like in normal experiments, you say, rats learn how to solve a maze if you let them do it 15 times or something like that. But if the maze were to be changing all the time, then that rule doesn't hold anymore. Maybe the rat never learns the maze. Or maybe it always gets to the end anyway, using some other method. So back then, 23 years ago, there were children who had not seen a computer, not heard of the internet, etc., except for a few rich people. I'm talking of the 1990s. If you remember, well, you probably won't remember, but for those who do remember, a personal computer, the IBM PC, used to cost about approximately a month's salary for most average people, the 2 or 3 thousand pounds, maybe more. So very few people could afford to actually buy one and have one at home. It took a long time for people to realize that you could have a computer at home. I mean, what on earth for? Then came the question of what happened to those rich guys when they actually did get a computer which they didn't know what to do with in their house. Well, the next problem is where I came into the picture, because some of these richer friends of mine said, I can't keep the children away from that thing, and it's expensive machine. I've told them, don't even think about it, don't do anything, but they keep wanting to touch it. And I said, so why don't you just, lock the door or something? And then they said, no, but there's something funny. The thing is, they seem to be able to tell me things which I don't know about the computer. Like if I'm trying to find a file, and these were the days of MS-DOS, a 6-year-old would say, why don't you type dir/w/p, because then it'll stop at every page instead of just rolling up. And I would turn around and say, what? How do you know that? And the 6-year-old would say, well, you just did that yesterday, And I see. Okay, I forgot. So the rich people with the computers came to the conclusion that they had gifted children. And they told me about it. And I said, and they said, Sugata, my little girl, she's clearly gifted. And I thought to myself, well, all the children of the rich people seem to have suddenly become gifted. That doesn't make sense. Maybe it's something that any child would do if he had a computer, if she had a computer. But how would you? Anyway, so at that time, this strange thought came to my mind. What would happen if I took a computer and with no explanation, just put it in front of some children? Remember, it's 1999, okay? Right now, it's something that you would do casually, but then it was like saying, I'll take a nuclear submarine and give it to some children. So how would I do that? Well, I said, I'll put it on the street. It will get stolen. Well, I'll put it behind a wall. How will they see the screen? I'll make a hole in the wall. That's how it got the name. So there's this wall, there's this hole, and there's this computer stuck through it. And the children come. It's a bit like a bank ATM, okay, except that it's 3 feet off the ground. Anyway, to quickly jump to what happened next, I switched the computer on. It was running Microsoft Windows of that time, everything in English. And a whole bunch of children in New Delhi, in a slum, who barely went to school, never seen a computer, never heard of the internet, so they came rushing around and staring at it. And then I said, I didn't say anything, I just stood there. And they looked at me. And I looked back at them. I didn't say a word. Why didn't I say a word? Because if I had said, this is a computer, this is what you have to do, then in order to educate children like them all around the world, you would need millions and millions and millions of me. We don't have that. So I just stood there quietly. Nothing happened, and I learned my first lesson, ladies and gentlemen. If you have a guy in a tie standing in front of children, they don't do anything. Okay? All creativity is completely lost. So I realized that, oh, heck, it's not because they don't understand the computer, it's because I'm there. So I turned around and I walked off. And instantly there was a babble of conversation. An hour later, another friend of mine said, I was coming to visit you, but what are those children surfing on the internet outside your main boundary wall? What's going on? So I said, what did you say? And he said, browsing the internet. I said, they're browsing on the internet? And he said, yeah. So the Times of India, one of the big newspapers, arrived. And they said, who taught them to do this? And I said, nobody. Nobody did. They just did it by themselves. And it's impossible. I mean, it was like saying, oh, these children, they just learned how to drive a nuclear submarine by themselves. But the thing is, the internet and the personal computer is not like a nuclear submarine. It doesn't blow things up and it doesn't drown you. You can do what you want with it and it responds back. The children learned that very, very quickly. And then they started teaching themselves. So that was the history of the experiment that got to be called the hole in the wall. What did it say? It said that, now listen, it said groups of unsupervised children given a computer with the internet on it will learn how to operate it and to use the internet. All the words are important, but particularly important is the word group. It won't happen if you have one child. You just stand there. After a while, you'll say, Dad, can you show me what to do next? Okay, you need the group. So I learned all of that, and I'm going to jump a few years. And then I came to England in 2006. By that time, the experiment was known everywhere. And right opposite Newcastle University, where I was working, is Gateshead, where I live. I met a school teacher from Gateshead, and I went with her to her school, a little primary school. And I met the children, and I gave them, I told the teacher to take out just 2 or 3 computers. And she said, well, we've got computers for everybody. I said, yeah, I know that. But, just put them away back in the cupboard. Just take out 3 or 4. You know why? Because you need the groups. So I put those 2 or 3 computers in there. And the children said, what happened to the other computers? I said, I don't know. We're just going to have 3 or 4 computers. And I'm going to ask you a question. And I asked them a question. I don't quite remember. It was something pretty simple, but interesting. Oh, yes, I remember. I asked them what would happen if they didn't cut their nails. So they kind of laughed. They were, I think, 8 years old, year 4. They said they'll grow. So I said, yeah, and how long will they grow? Oh, they'll grow very long, they said. I said, oh, very long, as in they'll grow until they go out of the window? And they laughed and said, no, not that long. So I said, oh, that's very strange. So they're going to grow long, but not that long. So after a while, they're going to stop growing. Oh, what's this with nails? Why are they there anyway? And the children said, why? And I said, well, you've got the internet. And the children said, no, it's not allowed. And I said, no, hang on. I've spoken to your principal. It is allowed for this session. Go ahead. What happened in the next 20 minutes was that we learned about anthropology, about flight, fight, about teeth and nails and why they grow, about calcium, from 9-year-olds. And the teacher's just standing there and saying, Sugata, what's going on? And I said, well, I suppose it's learning of some kind, but there's no teaching. So who's teaching them? The internet. I said, no, the internet's not teaching them. The internet's just sitting there passively. The children are just doing things to it, and it's, just reacting back. So we made a name for it. We called it self-organized learning. Okay. And that classroom with the 3 or 4 computers and 20 children around it, we called it a self-organized learning environment. I had actually managed to bring the hole in the wall to England, and it worked. It worked a lot better than India because the children spoke English. They didn't have a problem reading stuff off the screen. So we pushed the envelope further and further and further. In about 2 years' time, and all of this is published, by the way. In 2 years' time, I was able to say that groups of children given access to the internet can answer just about anything by themselves. And all hell broke loose. I wish I could say that I was instantly awarded. I was not. People said, this is absolute nonsense, this is baloney. What do you mean by they can answer everything? I said, well, I mean, how can I prove that they can answer everything? I can't ask them everything, but I can only tell you that whatever I've asked so far, they have been able to answer. So the idea sort of filtered around in the teachers in the schools in Gateshead started talking amongst themselves. Not that they said any fantastic things about all of this. They only said that, you know that guy, they used to call me the Professor Bloke. You know that Professor Bloke who comes to our school? Well, if his name is Sugata, and if you have not prepared for a lesson, you can do a Sugata with the children.
Now I see why you were popular, Sugata.
Yes. I became very popular with the school teachers.
No lesson planning, just do a Sugata.
So I was forced in Gateshead to evolve what doing a Sugata means. You know what it means? It simply means that if a teacher says, I'm supposed to teach art appreciation, and I haven't prepared anything. Now, you can't go into a classroom and say, children, today you're going to learn art appreciation. That doesn't work. But you could go in and say, who is the artist that made pictures of flowers in vases and things like that with light and shade and became very famous? And you'll get back your answer. I forget, what was the name? Cézanne. I learned that from 9-year-olds in a school called George Stephenson High School. Cézanne, so they pronounced it Susan, so I had to say, no, it's not Susan, it's Cézanne. And it's Cézanne. Oh, he used light and shade to produce what looks like 3D, they said. And I turned to the art teacher and I said, is that okay? And he said, yeah, it's more than okay. I didn't realize that they would get to that in 30 minutes. I said, oh, they did. And that's how the method started rolling out. It rolled out of Gateshead and it started traveling south into southern England. It went up into Scotland. Teachers just playing around with the method. And then it suddenly jumped because of a lecture I took in Victoria, Melbourne, in Australia. 3 or 4 school principals in Australia picked it up. And they said, you know what? It works exactly the same way here. So I said, why would it not? And they said, well, we thought it might work slightly differently from England. I think it works just the same way. And I said, well, why don't we ask some other teachers to try it? And anyway, souls moved all over the world. Okay, it just exploded into Latin America, into the United States, everywhere. Why? Not because I had made a brilliant invention, but because teachers thought that this makes teaching easier.
It does make teaching easier because I used it. I didn't even realize it was I was talking to the lads about this the other day. Is that I remember somebody showing me this soul principle and thinking, this is well good. This is well. I didn't realize it was yours until like literally a few weeks ago, because I've not done my research like I should have done. But I think I'm listening to what you're saying, and I love that. Do you know, it's one of those when you can hear a story and you can hear how it's evolved. You can like listen for ages, and it just resonates really well. You talk about what I'm picking up is that this idea around curiosity, and I know that that's really seems like something that is at the heartbeat of this, is that actually children are super curious. In fact, a lot of people are curious until it's drilled out of them, until it's schooled out of them maybe. But curiosity is one of those things that we can tap into, and if you give people the right tools and like foster that curiosity, there's an opportunity here to do real learning and real meaningful stuff. Is that do you think that's fair in kind of summing up what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would use the instead of simply calling it curiosity, I would say questions. And if you think about the whole of human development, has it not all been around what people thought were cool questions? Why does this work like this? Why doesn't it work like that? Etc. We've developed using questions ever since we were, cave people. But having built up a body of knowledge, we now say we must teach the children this entire body of knowledge first before they can start asking questions. But by the time we've done with that, they've stopped asking questions. They're just saying, let me out of here. so that's what goes wrong.
Yeah, I can see that.
It does sound. It doesn't surprise me that it started in Gateshead, Sugata being the best town in the world.
Wow. It didn't start in Gateshead, Dan. It started in India.
Yeah, clearly Dan's been listening. Just focused on the bit that was resonating.
It came into its own in Gateshead.
It did it, right? Okay.
No, to be very honest, I mean, you have to take the sequence of events. The hole in the wall is purely Indian. What it says is that street children can learn to use computers and the internet. The self-organized learning environment is purely Gateshead. I had no clue that that's what would happen when I came into England, because in England I didn't have to deal with illiterate children roaming around in the streets. So when I was in the classroom, what could I do? Well, I could just ask them something that would catch their attention. And that's where I learned that this is how it works. I, of course, told the children the story of the hole in the wall. And I still remember in Gateshead a remarkable experience of my explaining to a year 4 or year 5 class. And I said, let me tell you about India. They would all sit up if I said, let me tell you something about India. I said, I did this experiment. I put a computer with internet on it. And there were children who couldn't read and write, never seen a computer, never seen the internet. What do you think they did with it? And I thought, they would get, oh, what did they do? Nothing of the sort. They just muttered amongst themselves for a little while, and then they turned to me and said they would have figured it out in a couple of minutes, I guess. And I said, gosh, these children knew the answer even before I had done the experiment. It's just that nobody asked the children this. Okay, back in the 90s, we only told the children to stay away from the computer. It's very expensive. So anyway, so the thing is that there was the soul, which kind of developed into England. It's kind of romantic, isn't it? The hole in the wall came all the way from from India into England, became the self-organized learning environment, and went drifting back down south into India and Australia.
And it does sound like, when you were saying before, it sounds like in order to do this, you have to have a real craft of asking the right type of question and really, really craft that question. It seems to be a kind of the polar opposite to what we see teaching as on the whole, where it's more crafting an answer. How do we craft the curriculum, the content, the answers to the world's questions? And I suppose, and you've touched on it before, if you're gonna flip learning on its head like that, Sugata, you're gonna get resistance, aren't you? You're gonna get people who disagree with you, and I know you did touch on it before. I think especially as three educators here, or former educators from the UK, we see a lot of that today still in 2022. A lot of wanting to return to traditional schooling, to that type of schooling where it's all about the craft and the right answer, and not necessarily asking the questions that, like you say. Yeah, I guess it's, and I noticed as well, and it'd be great to get onto the TES article that came out in March, when you kind of outline some of the predictions for the future. But even that article, I remember going on Twitter and seeing it on Twitter, and some of the reactions on the comments on Twitter from traditional style teachers who were having a go at the ideas in the article. I suppose on a personal level, do you get a lot of that? Do you get a lot of resistance? And I suppose, what's your attitude to that resistance?
Well, I do, but to be honest, I don't get a lot of resistance. what I get increasingly now are people who say, yeah, we didn't see it coming. Okay, which is a very hopeful sign. And remember that example I was giving you about how the nature of the problem itself changes. If the nature of a problem changes as you're solving it, then people's attitudes also change accordingly. So today in 2022, nobody's surprised that children have access to the internet or that they can do fascinating things on the internet. Everybody knows that if you have a problem with your mobile phone, you should look for the nearest 12-year-old, and they'll probably sort it out for you.
Yeah.
So we've gotten used to this idea. But there are people who strongly resent this change. It's not that they resent my work, they resent the change. They want to wish it wasn't there. So a very popular phrase is when we go back to normal, which I think is really a very poor statement to make about life, when we go back to normal. So that is what I've been sort of struggling a bit with, and also with where the internet is going now, which is, I guess, we should switch in this conversation now to that bit. Where are we headed now? Well, let me tell you that a lot of people used to ask me, at what age can you do a soul? And I used to say 8 years, maybe 7, 8. Why? Because they can read by then. And it's important that they should be able to look at the screen and see what's written over there. Well, a couple of months ago, I met a teacher in New Mexico in the United States who said, "Oh, I'm so happy that you're here, that you invented the soul, and I use the soul all the time." And I said, "Oh, fantastic. So what do you use the soul for?" And she said, "It's really wonderful for 2-year-olds." And I said, What? Just come again?" She said, 2-year-olds. I said, 2-year-olds, but they can't read. So she said, "No, they can't. So what?" And I suddenly realized what was going on. The 2-year-olds were talking to the devices, and the devices were talking back. And it was like, it still gives me goose pimples when I think of that I would live to see a world where a little plastic square would talk back to you when you spoke to it. And I reacted with a mixture of joy and horror. Joy because the children now have the capability to answer a question at any age. Just ask the question, and at the same time, there's the danger that they will give you an utterly wrong point of view or a completely wrong course of action. A 3-year-old might say, there's a smell of smoke in the house. And the little plastic square might just say, "Why didn't you open a window?" Instead of saying, "Call somebody, call the police," or whatever. So it needs regulation like any fledgling technology. But this whole idea of being able to process speech, being able to see, process image, it's changing learning once again.
And maybe if Neuralink, Elon Musk Neuralink actually happens, as soon as they come out of the womb, they've got a thought and it gives them an answer. So it could even, it's I'm being facetious, but I think I look at that as an idea in terms of, I've got an 8-year-old, I used to say a 7-year-old, she's had a birthday since we were last on. I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old who genuinely are, they're just sponges, and the kids are sponges, aren't they? And if you give them something they're interested in and then have got an opportunity, they're both learning to play the piano. Wow. It was a challenge to get that to happen. I've always thought, I think it's an important thing for them to learn. Grandparents bought them a piano, and then my old piano teacher also is teaching them how to play the piano, which is lovely. But she was having a conversation this week. She said there's been a massive breakthrough in the eldest one, who just is starting to read the music. They've only been learning 3 or 4 months, but rather than just going slowly. She's seeing it in front of her, and there's patterns starting to appear, and she's starting to understand. And it's that level of learning that happens because what's happened is because she's got functionality of being able to know where the notes are and know what the notation looks like. She's got that level of foundational understanding, like you were talking about in terms of reading. She's started now to learn how that then turns into tune, into tempo, and you think that could be a really nice thing. And I think that's what's happening in terms of the process you're talking about there. There's the foundations, and then foundations can get younger and younger and younger. As long as they get the foundations learning, then they can go and explore. And that exploratory learning, that curious questioning stuff that you talked about in your article about questioning, then investigation, and then learning happens, isn't it? And that's essentially what's happening, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that it is. But let me play my own critic and say that process, we know that process works and children love it, but there is no curriculum, there is no order. Okay, so what happens to schooling? And most importantly, what happens to examinations? So as I was watching the times change, and I was looking at this new kind of hole in the wall appear, which is computers talking, I suddenly thought the exams are absolutely the opposite of this. We're going to have a generation of children who grew up with the internet, who have their phones with them all the time, except when they're having an exam. And at that point, you'll tell them, put away all the devices. It's completely unnatural. So I started to say, about a couple of years ago, why don't we allow the use of the internet, the use of smartphones during exams? And I must tell you that no one was happy about this suggestion. I said, why are you unhappy? And one of the answers I got in England from an English school teacher was, oh, but they'll answer everything, she said. And I said, well, I mean, don't you want them to? What are these exams for? I don't know. I mean, if you look at the questions in the exams, well, they have changed a bit, but by and large, they're still about facts. Facts that you can Google and get in an instant. They're from a time when, if you ever needed that information, you would not have access to the books, the libraries, the teachers that you need in order to be able to access that information. Whoever made that curriculum would not, in their wildest imaginations, have imagined a situation where a little black rectangle of plastic would actually play the role of all of that, of libraries, of teachers, of lecturers, of everything. So we can't just say, oh, they made a bad system. They did not. They made a perfect system for that time, for the 18th and the 19th centuries. After all, it kept the entire world running. And I can say this confidently. The British school education system kept the world running for a century, if not longer, because there was no alternative as such. A few here and there, but by and large, the problem is that it is out of date now, so it needs to change. Who is going to change it? And here we have a problem which is special to Britain. Because Britain invented that system, they're very fond of it. They will find it the hardest to change out of there. So what are the steps that we need? Well, according to me, the first thing is allow the internet during exams. Well, nobody listened for 3 years, as I said, but last year somebody did. The government of Israel, of all people. And they tried a whole sequence of exams where they allowed the students to use the internet, and they sent me all the data. I checked the data. There was an increase in the scores, but you know how much? Just 10%. I said, wow, that's all? Such an anticlimax. And then I looked at what was happening in the UK. Because of COVID, we didn't have the GCSEs for almost 2 years. And during those 2 years, teachers were asked to simply allocate marks based on a student's past performance. I took that data, and guess what? It was only 10% more than the historical average. I said, so there's this magic number, then 10%. It's appeared here, it's appeared in Israel. What's going on? The Israel government said, we will allow the use of the internet during exams. They said this in the OECD education meeting just this month, early June in Jerusalem. I was there. And I said, how did you decide to do such, take such a quick decision? Well, they said, firstly, there's your data about the 10%. But secondly, do you know how much money we spend on invigilation of exams? It's millions. We're going to stop, we're going to sack all the invigilators, and that's it, and give them all the internet and let it go through. They'll get 10% more. We'll reduce the marks by 10%. So, I mean, not the very best solution, I'm afraid. But the thing is, it's actually gone through. And to be more serious, it has to happen everywhere because we can't stop it. How are you going to stop it? This year, you're going to look for mobile phones on people. Next year, you're going to look for Bluetooth earbuds. The year after that, you're going to look for false teeth inside which there's a microchip which receives internet and sends it to your ears. It's endless. The internet is going to come into the exam like it does in real life.
It's an interesting one because in England, maybe as a response to the potential of, well, they use it all of the time, so why not use it in the exam? There is a narrative to say, ban the mobile phones in schools. Could that be the reason why they're saying, well, they don't use it on a regular basis in schools, they don't use it for learning at all, so why would they use it in the exam? I think that's the thing that let's be honest, because if they allow it in the classroom, it becomes common practice and for better. Yeah. But I think that's probably one of the reasons why they've seen it come in and not allowing it.
Oh, absolutely. And there are also financial considerations. For example, in universities, in Newcastle University, a group of students once asked me, why is the university charging £10,000 a year for us to listen to lectures that we could have Googled in 5 minutes? Now, they were overstating the case, but I think it made sense what they were saying. I think a person who is entering a classroom to teach something should stop for a minute and say, if instead of teaching, I were to ask the students to learn this off the internet, would they be able to? And all my work seems to say yes. So that brings a totally different twist on where education should be headed. We don't need to know stuff in advance. That's what our whole education system is about, knowing things in advance, just in case you ever need that information. What's an oxbow lake? Okay, so you were taught what an oxbow lake is. I don't know why. I mean, just in case we got lost in one, I guess, or something. But the thing is, even if you ever needed to know what an oxbow lake was, today, all you need is a phone. It'll tell you in a second what it is. And it'll even tell you what to do if you're in trouble in an oxbow lake. So anyway, so this whole nature of the educational system is changing. The internet is changing along with it. The internet can now see, it can hear, it can talk, and hold your breath, perhaps it can think. Or could it be that it's only pretending to do these things? See, hear, talk, think. I don't know the answer, but it's a big question. And we need to prepare a generation of young people to confront that question because they will face it in their lives. Is it really thinking or is it make-believe? How are we going to do that? According to me, very simple step. We need to introduce a new subject into schools, a subject called the internet. Why do we have physics in school? Why do we have chemistry in school? Well, among other reasons, so that you can figure out how your refrigerator works or how your air conditioner works or how your gas heating works. We know all of these things from these subjects, okay? And those subjects were not always there. They came in when they were required. How can we have our children growing up with the internet 24/7 without knowing how WhatsApp works. I ask this to many people. When you type a message into your phone and it gets into the other phone, what happens in between? Where does it go? Everybody guesses. Oh, it goes to a server. What does that mean? Which server? Whose server? Why? Oh, it can go to one of many servers. Are you sure? No, I'm not sure. That's what I heard. Why aren't we teaching the internet as a subject? Why don't we know what's inside our mobile phones? You know what's inside your refrigerator. You are in no danger of saying, I have a question. Does my refrigerator think? But you don't know what's inside your mobile phone. And therefore, if I say, maybe your mobile phone can think, you don't know what to do about that statement. We need this subject. So okay, you need a subject called the internet, which will teach about networking, about machines, about how basic computing works, and so on. And to teach it to 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds. It will also teach about networks of human beings and how information can get distorted within networks, how emergent order can appear. All of that. It's a fascinating subject. It's how nature works. If we have to drop one of the existing subjects to do it, I would say go ahead, drop it, because this is really important. So if we add that as a subject, and if I can make you agree that you must add it as a subject, then I have trapped you, because my next question will be, who is going to teach that? And you would say, you'll never find a teacher, because anyone who can teach the internet will be working at a much more higher paying job with some computing company somewhere. Why would they become a school teacher in the first place? I would say, how about textbooks? And you'd say, oh, you can't have a textbook on the internet as a subject because it will change every day. So you have a subject called the internet. It cannot have a textbook. It cannot have teachers. So how can it be learned? It can only be learned from the internet. And how can you examine for it? It can only be examined using the internet. So if you agree that the internet as a subject should be introduced into schools, then you've already agreed to my method and my method of assessment. Okay, this is my sinister plot. But I hope it made sense, what I'm saying. About. I mean, you guys have young children. You're talking about 8-year-olds, about 11-year-olds. Think of them 30 years from now. You want them to go around saying, "I don't know what the internet is," because they never dealt with it in school?
No, absolutely not. And I think, I suppose, what you're suggesting is, it seems really obvious. Like you've talked about exams, and I talked about the kind of craziness of exams. I wrote a piece recently about the idea of how exams are just broken as a concept, even just from printing them all out and then scanning them in and all the things that go with it, and the timeness and that idea of memory, and expecting people to remember, a young person to remember it under that pressure. And it's about what they can remember in that moment, as opposed to what's actually. I think I also talked about this idea that I did A-levels in Latin. Classic. I say this all the time. Sorry, lads. I say this all the time, and listeners. Latin, classics, and history, and I don't remember hardly anything of it because it didn't need it. And you said that that idea about that just in case learning, and you're talking about, like, I suppose that Toyota model of just in time learning. You learn as you need it, as we go. I think you're suggesting some really radical things here, and in that the article around, like, the internet in exams is radical in and of itself, but some of the stuff that it goes into is like super radical. No schools. Like, the schools won't exist. Let's can we go there, because that is super radical, and I think we probably need to see what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, should schools exist? I believe that they should, but what they should be doing, I think, is worth a complete rethink. And it's not the first time in history that's happened. There was a time when schools were meant only for verbal memorization. I mean, I come from a country, India, where this art was extremely developed. They actually passed down books by memory for thousands and thousands of years. It's a very efficient method. But do we need that now? Of course not. I I mean, that would be ridiculous if we had to retain a method like that. So we have to re-look at our methods. And while we're talking about radical things, there's something else I need to say. It's about the word knowing. We use it all the time. Do you know history? Do you know geography? Do you know how to use this computer? Do you know this? Do you know that? What if I were to say, what does knowing mean? So then you would say something like this. You ask me, do you know the way to the central station in Newcastle? And I say, no. And then I take out my phone and I follow the instructions and I get to Newcastle, like we all do without knowing where we're going. And I reach it. When I reach it, you ask me, but you said you didn't know. And I said, no, I still don't know. So do I know or do I not? I have a phrase for it, just for fun. A phrase for our age. I call it the end of knowing. Imagine your children growing up in that age, where if you say, hey, do you know how to make apple crumble? And your daughter, instead of saying yes or no, says, what do you mean by no? My phone knows how to do it. So we need to think about that as well. I actually wrote an article about it in a book commemorating 50 years of Seymour Papert's original book called 50 Things to Do with a Computer, which I think started educational technology for children. So at the end of 50 years, one of his students brought out a thing saying 50 things to do with a computer 50 years forward. And I got invited to write an article, and that article is there in the book. It's called The End of Knowing.
Go on, Dan, sorry.
No, I'm just I'm just thinking back to the exams as well, and like what you said is happening in Israel. I'm just thinking, does it not? Surely the examining there it's not necessarily about the knowing. So you can put, let's say you put 50 questions on a paper, and say you can use the computer. The test there isn't, and it links to what you're saying at the moment as well. And I think the test there isn't necessarily about, do you know the answers to those questions? It's more, do you know how to find the answer, and then what to do with it when you do find it, or kind of how do you sift through the fake news from the real news, and how do you distill down what actually the right answer is, and then how do you put it in a context that's actually going to be usable? And I suppose is it those skills that will replace the knowing? Is it
Absolutely.
And I suppose if you get to that point, do you even need subjects anymore in a school? Because
Well, I kind of agree that the whole idea of a subject, of this boxes in which we place certain amounts of it's not particularly accurate, but it is actually quite useful. It is useful for transporting a subject from one place to another in a box. That's why I said introduce a subject called the internet. But I agree with Dan entirely to say that, what does that mean? I mean, the internet of what? The internet where? Who? Whatever. Even plants use the internet. We know that now. So we don't need those boxes, except for the purposes of transportation of knowledge, and perhaps for defining a teacher for this box and a teacher for that box. Otherwise, we would have to rethink the entire terminology of who a teacher is and what a teacher is for, which also we will need to do.
Yeah, I think, well, if a teacher becomes about, and I think when we met a few weeks ago, we were talking about the whole idea of, and we've talked to, and I know Rob Hoban from the Agora School in the Netherlands. kind of their model of, well, if you need to speak to an expert about something, let's actually go into the real world and find an expert on that subject, because the teacher can't be an expert on every aspect of their subject. Does that whole model of a teacher change from a teacher to a coach, a mentor, someone who can ask the right questions rather than answer the right questions?
Yeah, sometimes not even that. I have a model. I have a role model for this, and he's very old. It's Socrates. Uh, he was a teacher like that. According to me, he was one of the greatest, one of the most forward-thinking people the world has ever seen, I think. It's not, he did not even make up the questions, all the questions himself. He raised one or two, and then the students would start raising the questions, and all he would say would be, so what do you think? And another discussion and another discussion. And it seems to me ironic that 2,500 years later, there was another man who used this method to actually change people's brains, to change people's minds. You know who that was? The guy who said, what do you think, all the time? It was Sigmund Freud. When somebody said, I'm feeling extremely annoyed. And he would say, why? And he'd say, I don't know. And he would say, well, what do you think? Why? And so on and on and on. It was very Socratic, his psychoanalytical methods. But anyway, back to Socrates. He drove the whole system with questions, except that it didn't have the internet. So it was even harder for him, because all the questions had to be done through what he called an examination of principles. And he's famous for saying an unexamined life is not worth living. So he used this method of examination. But we have much better than that. We have the internet, which is basically the knowledge of billions of people. All we need to know to do, as Dan said, is to be able to navigate through that, to figure out what can be accurate, what's not accurate, what's good, what's bad. And that skill, our children will absolutely have to have. Actually, we needed to have that, because it's not as though every newspaper and every TV channel speaking the truth all the time. We've all learned how to figure out the good stuff from the bad stuff, and we're not always very accurate at it. Sometimes we make mistakes. So those skills are required. But what I think is very essential is to understand that the internet, it has behavior of its own. And that's something which people sort of find very hard to grasp, that a network has behavior of its own. Although people have said this over and over again, it's not a new idea. It's in economics, it's called spontaneous order. That's how stock markets work. You can't say that the stock market or the stock price of a company depends on stockbrokers. It's the collective opinion of millions of stockbrokers that produces spontaneous order in the system. The internet's doing that, billions of times over. What will come? I don't know. I can't predict that. But all I know is that we cannot hold it back from the children and then hope that they'll, that'll be really unfair to say, you don't use it. What happens when we are gone? They're going to be left with the open internet in front of them. I think we should bring it into our homes, bring it into our schools. We should go in there, and as I've often said to teachers, and I would say to parents, the operating principle is, you go there, I'll come with you as long as I can.
Yeah, and I think if it doesn't happen, we're already starting to see splinter groups of children around the world who are accessing online schools and gaining skills that can't be gained in a traditional school. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, we had guests on the podcast who were creating a school within the metaverse. So the students would put on a virtual reality headset, and they would take part in their schooling through a virtual reality world based in the internet. And if that gets taken up by various groups of children, we're going to see a real split, I think.
Oh yeah, we will. But I should also raise a bit of a warning fact there. You know, a lot of ed tech tries to focus on recreating on the internet what existed in 3D space. So here's a super duper video conferencing model which makes it look as though you're in a real classroom. But do I actually need that? It's like saying, what if Mercedes were to say, our new model of car will be so good that you won't be able to tell if you're in a horse and cart or in a real car. You can't make a car behave like a horse and cart anyway, and you shouldn't. Similarly, I don't see why we should make the internet behave as though, it's a classroom. So if Meta does it right, then they should create a world which is not like the physical world, which doesn't have the defects that the physical world has, and which doesn't involve students sitting next to each other in rows and columns, etc., etc. If they don't do it right, and they may not do it right because of economic reasons, because it's easier to sell to parents the idea that on the internet it looks exactly like it would in a real life classroom. Parents could buy into that sort of thing, but that would be really unfair.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think we're going to wrap it up there, Sugata. Thank you so much for your time today and for joining us for the award ceremony, and congratulations again. Another award there for your trophy cabinet.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's lovely. But let's move to the next step.
Yes, definitely. And let's stay in touch. I know we're geographically very close, but let's keep talking and driving this agenda, because I think it's important for our children and the children after them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sugata. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers. I enjoyed that. Thank you.